Hello, I'm back again from London, this time with Andy Cornell from A-Bar Sea Services in South Africa. We are pleased to be able to welcome an interesting panel this afternoon, which will be covering perishable logistics as well as customers of the logistics chain. So we are trying to have both parties come together. I couldn't imagine any person better to be able to help me co-moderate the session than Andy Cornell, who indeed has actually been fighting on both sides of the fence, representing the interests of the perishable logistics community and also at some stage the interests of a shipper, notably Dole South Africa. I will be asking Andy to tell us a little bit what we can expect from this session this afternoon.
Thank you, Alex. Good day to you and good day to everybody attending. Well, what a year we've had, 2020, and COVID-19 has really changed what most of us thought we knew about logistics and about supply chains and even about perishables, getting them to market. We've had to really go back to the drawing board. We've had to start learning all over again. We've had to become discoverers all over again. And we've gathered a panel of experts here who've all been affected and have to really call on all their expertise because they've been affected by these events of 2020. All had to learn to cope around changing normals. It wasn't one change, there were many changes. And they had to cope and they had to still prosper. We hope to learn from them today how they managed their supply chains and how they managed to adapt to the sudden changes to a digital world. Everything became digital and paper was very difficult to process over this period with offices closed. And this year, everybody has been working remotely and trying to do their work. And somehow the products have flowed and they've arrived at destinations. We all know this could never have been very easy. We'd like to learn how this happened.
Thank you, Andy. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who will be Mark Aston, Head of Operations at Chillchain. Mark has kindly agreed to jump into Jack Fleming's slot at the very last minute. And Mark will be explaining to us the mysteries of the last mile, not just the last minute.
So my name is Mark Aston. I work at a company called Chillchain. We are a freight logistic technology platform that facilitates the transaction and the movement of chilled, frozen, chilled goods from internally within the UK, but also from Europe to the UK on road. So even though we do not specifically arrange or manage the transportation in air from, say, Asia or South America, we do have a lot of customers and a lot of companies that we deal with that do this movement themselves, and then we are the ones that help and manage the road transport solutions for them from the Europe or into the UK. So basically, I'm going to be spending the sort of 10 minutes talking a little bit around Chillchain, but also mainly around the Brexit problem come the 1st of January, how possibly the change and transition will happen, how I foresee this is going to impact the road transport industry, but not just the specific industry itself, but how it could possibly impact growers and issues that will need to be addressed come the 1st of January, whether it's just because you as a party are someone that is directly involved or you use a external party, and everyone's going to be involved in this process, and it's going to change how the country runs. Especially at the moment, we sit at a point where we're, I think, around 50 days away, and we don't even know the last publication that was meant to be out at the start of November still isn't out, and we still don't know whether we're going to have a deal or not. So really, we have to think of a worst case scenario and how we're going to get there. So really, what is the current and traditional method for fresh produce providers? Well, really, it is we take a product from, say, Chile, from Asia. It is often shipped in containers over to Rotterdam. This is decanted into refrigerated vehicles, and then they are transported to the UK, whether that be Kent, Spalding, or another part of the UK. We help, and we have a lot of expertise in that movement from Hoogstraten auction in Holland, from the ports around that area, from Belgium, from Holland, but also, of course, we know there's a lot of road transport as well from fresh produce providers from Spain that also import and export out from the bottom of Murcia, as well as Italy, Croatia, etc. So really, what is the main issues come the 1st of January? The main issue is really no one really knows. What we do know needs to be addressed, and as soon as possible. There is a huge backlog in it anyway, but for example, if you want to do any trade with the UK come the 1st of January, you'll need to make sure you have an EORI number. This is something so simple, so basic, but without it, there will be no ability to do the trade, and that will be so important in what needs to be done. There is also the pretty obvious realization that everybody that is importing to and from Europe will need to do an import and export clearance. So you'll need to say, for example, let's just take that hypothetical scenario of cherries from Chile into Holland. You'll need to make sure that you have an export clearance from Holland, but also an import clearance into the UK. And there is talk whether, and through the research, whether there will be a possibility to have that pass through on specific documentation. But of course, we have to just be prepared for the worst case scenario, and especially if you're a grower that's actually growing from Europe, and actually those goods are going through the transaction, we'll need to make sure that those import and export clearances are done. You've also got I think the most common and the biggest issue that you're going to find with this kind of import and export work, especially from the longer supply chains and the traditional supply chains, is the queues that are going to occur in road transport. You're going to find that there could possibly be up to sort of 26 to 48 hours worth of queues at the Dover-Calais crossing, and that's not including Folkestone at the Channel Tunnel, and that then has a big impact on things such as Harwich and the Immingham routes and the unaccompanied routes. That will have a big impact on that, whether that's just in price or in time, because as capacity goes up, demand goes up, of course. So it's a real risk moving forward, and it will be with the collapse of air freight as well. It's going to be until that COVID crisis and air freight comes back to normal, there could be no option to have that ability to fly and move those goods quickly, especially those real perishable goods. So how do we overcome that? And that's some of the sort of biggest methods and problems that we're currently facing. You could be found that using the traditional method in the supply chain, that we could be stuck with only UK grown produce, which of course is not going to happen. But I think the biggest questions that we have to pose is the port infrastructure in the UK ready, for example? So you could look at shortening that supply chain up and moving your containers, instead of going, say, to Rotterdam, you put it on one of the longer term vessels that maybe stops in Southampton, stops at London Gateway, and so on and so forth. But really, is the UK infrastructure ready for that? There's already huge amounts of delays at Felix, though, just because of the 10,000 dry good containers that the government brought in of masks, and the delays that it's having on the whole Felixstowe infrastructure, whether fresh or dry. The hold up, they just can't process enough containers because there's a huge backlog right in the middle of the port, and that's just that's meant to be one of the biggest and best ports in the country, and also there's a huge cost of built, discharge and delivery. So you'll find that with a lot of providers in the UK, I'm not going to go out there and name names, but you will find that there's a huge proportion of those that have cold stores at ports that will maybe not necessarily be charging you huge RH&D costs, but actually they really charge you high on the delivery aspect. So whereas many of you will have customers that you deal with directly at the port of Rotterdam that will be able to discharge those products at a fair rate, because you discharge them into Europe as well. But then you just find that provider in the UK that can or in Holland that can deliver it to the UK, and that really brings down the cost. But then there's huge amounts of UK providers that really charge a real high premium just for getting that short route, maybe from a UK port into an English consumer, which can really add up, and it probably more than likely will only go up as the demand increases for the service, which will really add to the cost, especially if you're doing some very quick last minute banana transports, like pineapple transports from the markets or whatnot. There really will be a huge positive to find and uncover the quick and versatility that you'll need. So really, I think the best thing I would like to just go over is just sort of the solutions that I think that are out there that also I believe that ChillChain that we are looking at and we can help with. So really, when you look at the long supply chain method, the key aspect to this will be the versatility. So you'll find that, of course, you always get a cheaper price if you use the Dover-Calais route due to the price of the ferry, and often you're using drivers that will then go into the UK and then export the goods in the vehicles. What you'll then find is if there's a 48-hour delay and you're moving perishable goods, actually your value of that product will go down so quickly in those 48 hours, you can't sell it at such a high price, that actually using an overnight unaccompanied service that maybe costs £200 more in transport, so you've gone from £1,300 for a transport from Rotterdam to £1,600 or £1,500, is actually is a better investment because you know it will get there overnight. Whereas you may necessarily not have that if you go to Dover-Calais and you're stuck in a 48-hour queue, and you can't even commit and promise when you'll arrive. So really having that versatility and not just using one haulier, and that's something that ChillChain offers, is that we have a huge amount of variety, a huge amount of haulier network in Holland, whether it's in Europe in general. We use huge, large, small, medium providers. We're able to really find and uncover that solution and be versatile depending on the market day by day, really, which is the most important thing. It's outweighing that price to time and service level. And also, if you are looking at shipping directly to the UK, firms that discharge goods will also be the ones that you'll look at as a provider and option. So one thing that we can work with is you can go to these providers and automatically get the transport removed, because one of our specialities is UK internal transport. And then because of that, we're able to, you can just make sure you get RH&D transport costs, you're really bringing down the cost, and we can make sure you're uncovered and find the cheapest UK internal price as possible, which is really making sure that you can provide that value at a shorter chain, because even though you may be spending more on the ferry transport on RH&D, the value of making sure your goods are in the country, maybe even a week earlier at times it could get to, is crucial. But what you want to make sure is you're not spending £1,500 to transport your goods from London Gateway up to Liverpool. You actually want to be spending £450 to do that, which ChillChain is a service we offer. And one of the main things that we really offer is helping. So if you keep it to your traditional methods, there will actually be one of the biggest difficulties, and we've spoken with or we know of, is, for example, the Spanish market. If you're an internal fresh produce provider, the Spanish hauliers are going to start charging €4,000 to move things from Spain, because they know they're not going to get a single export, whether that's because of cabotage rules, etc. And this all lies depending on the Brexit documentation. But with that extra €1,000 charge, it's just going to make a huge price for providers to bring 26 pallets of cucumbers and tomatoes into the country. And that will be the same for the Dutch guys. You know that a lot of the guys that move from Eastern Europe, Germany, Holland, those providers will start charging an extra £400-500 just to move produce, because they know they can't get anything back. But what's actually crazy about the UK market, and what we uncover with all the data that we have in our company, is that actually you get a haulier, a foreign haulier, will get paid more to move a full load of product from West Brom to Dagenham. So, like, for example, we're moving product from West Bromwich to Tesco Dagenham. You'll find that actually you'll get paid more to do that than if you are moving product from Birmingham, West Bromwich over to Belgium, for example. And the reason for that, and what that really brings, is that we're able to uncover a UK clientele that nobody really can access, because we don't just deal with fresh produce, we deal with a huge variety of products, and that can really help. So if we can work with these hauliers and make sure we're providing them export and backloads, not just export to the UK, but maybe just providing them 300, 400 kilometers worth of distance for £400-500. That's actually giving them more rather than them traveling back empty, which more and more will have to do. And the more that travel back empty, the higher price it will be for your transport. So really, fundamentally, having Chillchain access that UK internal market, whether it just be empty trays back from a production site of Tesco and Marks and Spencer's who have cleaned the trays and they need to bring them back down to a pack house in Kent, we actually can open the door to that, which actually provides a fundamental overall cheaper price for the provider and the consumer. So really, that's I could talk for hours on the fundamental issues of Brexit and what could become, but I think that really a conclusion point is that the traditional method will still exist, it'll still be possible, but actually supply chains are going to have to be so more responsive and really, really responsive to not just the market price, but the market conditions. So whether that be in long-term solutions, whether that be in making sure you have all the import and export clearances done to prevent that hold up at Dover at any port, really. But on top of that, making sure that you can be versatile with your actions. You're not just stuck in one traditional method. It might be that you see a transition, you need to go to the UK provider. So you can find a solution with the cheapest possible solution that matches your cost structure, but also is versatile. But then on top of that, you also need to make sure that you have a solution and a possibility where you are, I think the best way to put it is you're looking at the market conditions, you're seeing, right, there's a 48-hour queue, I'm going to drop value here. So actually the algorithm is telling me I need to use a higher provider, but you need to make sure you're not using one provider for that. You have the option for thousands. And that's the most important thing, really, when it comes to the 1st of January. But we are still all unknown. And hopefully, as time comes, you just need to be as ready and as prepared as possible.
Thank you, Mark, for a very interesting presentation, and also giving us the latest situation on how Brexit is going to impact on the perishable supply chain, and to what extent a company like Chillchain can alleviate some of the expected hiccups. Now I'd like to hand back to Andy Cornell. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Our next presentation is going to be delivered by Michelle Luton, who's the Director of Maritime Seabury Consulting. Michelle's going to talk to us about matching the supply and demand. Welcome, Michelle.
Good day, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation on the reefer market outlook at this Cool Logistics Asia event. In this presentation, I will start with a global perishables trade overview and then focus on China, especially the impact of the swine flu. Then we'll take a look at intra-Asia and finally a brief perishables trade outlook for 2020 and beyond. Starting with the global overview. The perishables trade has been remarkably resilient during COVID. This is true when you see the orange line on the top. Only in the last month did perishables trade dip slightly into negative territory. This could have been a seasonal impact. The container trade, by contrast, has seen a big drop in the early part of the year, especially April and May, with an equally fast recovery that seems to be continuing. But still, overall, year-to-date, container trade is down by 5%, with perishables up 4%. By contrast, the air cargo trade is still down 12% year-to-date and saw the low point of minus 23% in April. All in all, we can conclude that perishables trade is fairly resilient, and that makes sense because people still have to eat, and most of the goods transported as perishables are edible commodities. If we look at where the growth is taking place, this is a chart showing year-to-date volumes up to August, taken from our global ocean trade database. We can see that the exports from South America, or Latin America, I should say, are particularly driving this. 7% growth to North America, 20% to Asia, and 7% to Europe. Also, Europe to Asia and Trans-Pacific trade in both directions, plus intra-Asia, are showing healthy growth. Also, Africa trades are doing well. So all in all, Most of the major reefer trades are doing pretty well, leading to a year-to-date figure of 3.7% versus an overall containerized growth of minus 4.8%. So that there's a clear contrast between what's happening in the perishables market compared to what's happening in the overall container market. Having said that, let's now focus on China, including the impact of the swine flu on the flows into China. China is now the largest perishables importer in the world. The growth in 2020 is 36%. That is very, very high considering China was already coming from a seriously high base. But China has now overtaken the USA as the #1 destination for reefer imports. Japan, Netherlands, Hong Kong, South Korea, etc. They all follow at suitable distance. And as you can see from the growth rates, none of these countries have particularly interesting growth rates. Although maybe Hong Kong with a negative growth compared to China's 36 is noteworthy. But all in all, China is really the driving force. And without China's import growth, global growth would have been negative compared to the close to 4% positive growth that we're seeing now. The commodities that China imports are mainly frozen meat. All the other commodities, they show some growth, but they're not really noteworthy, whereas frozen meat grew 75% in 2020. So, frozen meat it is. When we're looking at frozen meat, the three main commodities there are pork, beef, and poultry. Beef and poultry are showing healthy growth levels. Very healthy indeed, but from a lower base, and they remain very much second and third compared to pork. Pork imports have really taken off since 2019. You can see the orange line on the top, and this is clearly impacted by China's loss of pork production because of the swine flu in 2018. China had no choice but to import pork if they wanted to keep their demand satisfied. And Chinese people, they love their pork, so there was no alternative realistically other than to import it from places like USA, Spain, and Germany. And as you can see, also China banned pork imports after an African swine fever case in Germany. So even once you're involved in the trade, you need to be vigilant and need to make sure you stick to the Chinese demands, especially in terms of quality of the meat. Once there is a quality issue, then China can just as easily ban it. So it's a difficult trade to be involved in, but definitely the volumes are out there. What we also see as an impact of the swine flu, this is maybe not so much containerized trade, but as a bit of a sidestep, we see imports of animal feeds have soared recently. So China is importing much more animal feed. This probably also has to do with them recovering their pork herds. Then you need more animal feed to feed those pigs. And this is what seems to be happening as well. Also, soy and wheat imports have increased quite a bit, but that is maybe not so much related to this problem of having to grow the pork herds. The long-term target for China is to be 95% self-sufficient in pork. So that means this import of pork might not be sustainable in the long run because China wants to produce it themselves, but maybe some of the animal feeds of wheat and soy might in the long run remain. But this is very much a question from our side. We don't have the answer here, but it is very interesting to keep an eye on not just the pork imports, they might go, but on also some of the other commodities that are related to it that China needs to import. Now we'll take a look at the intra-Asia trade. Intra-Asia is showing strong export growth of perishables across most product groups, but clearly it's driven by fresh fruits and fresh vegetables. Fresh fruits grew 19% for almost 500,000 TU, or 500,000 ton rather. Fresh vegetables only grew 6%, but that's still 140,000 tons. We also put the air trade share there. So of 100% of air share, 29% of that was fresh fruits, 23% was other fresh products, and 19% was fresh seafoods. But as you can see, other fresh products and fresh seafood are quite small from an ocean perspective. So we think we should look a little bit into more detail into fresh fruits, because we know that on the air side there was a big capacity crunch. Many aircraft are not even flying anymore, especially wide bodies. So this clearly brings a problem with capacity. So we thought we'd take a look at the biggest commodity in air trade and what impact would that potentially have on the intra-Asia trade, on the intra-Asian ocean trade. On the left-hand side, you see fresh fruits. This is all in tons, not in TU, so please mind that. What you can see is an example of fresh fruits on intra-Asia air. So that went down from 89,000 tons to 80,000 tons, whereas ocean went up from 2.5 million tons to 3 million tons. So quite a strong growth on ocean and a negative growth on air. So maybe there were examples of air commodities moving to ocean. The biggest example we could find was fresh grapes, went down 35% from Australia to China and Hong Kong. And it's probably shifted partially to ocean because on ocean there's a 14,000 ton growth. So it is probably true that for some industries, cargo moved from air to ocean. If we look at the impact that has on the ocean volumes, we took the 2019 volumes as an example. Fresh fruits by air were 121,000 tons out of a total of 415,000 tons. So if all the fresh fruits were to move to ocean in 2019, you could see that the impact is like 1% only of all reefer intra-Asia volumes. So if all fresh fruits in 2019 would have shifted from air to ocean, all 121,000 tons, that would hardly have made a difference to the reefer market. And this is actually the message that we would like to give. You read a lot about this air capacity crunch. And yes, in some instances, there may be opportunities there. But in general, the volumes that go by air are too small for ocean to be really of interest to start actively chasing those volumes. If you happen to be involved in the grape trade and you know your shippers there, yes, and you can supply the containers, then sure, it could be an interesting one. But you see that even a 35% drop for one commodity on one route is only 1,300 tons. So that is, not a huge amount of containers, I would say, that you would need for that. It may not be worth it to chase it, but even if all fresh fruits were going from air to ocean, it would really have a limited impact. So interesting to read about it. A disaster for the air cargo industry, but it's unfortunately not a big opportunity for ocean. Briefly then on the perishables trade outlook. In the long run, this is based on a Seabreeze forecast. We think the reefer cargoes will grow by about 5% per year on average, driven mainly by still Latin America. We still think that is where most of the reefer growth will come from. It will grow slightly above average. Asia will be slightly lower, and all the other regions, well, you can read the figures on the slide. We will do an update to this forecast. We're actually in the middle of doing that. So this forecast will be revised twice a year, but I don't think in the long run we should expect many major differences in the reefer market. It's driven by basics such as population growth and also income growth, where people can spend more on things like meat. And we also think that Latin America is still best positioned to remain ahead of other markets. A little bit here on Seabreeze Global Ocean Trade Database for you to read about where the data is coming from. I'm not going to spend time on it now. And finally, my contact details at the end of the presentation. That's it for me for now. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and let me know if you do have any questions.
Thank you very much, Michel Luton, for an excellent presentation on supply and demand. which leads me actually straight into the panel discussion with our three transport users. Before that, I wanted to give Mitchell Brook from the Citrus Growers Association in South Africa an opportunity to tell us how the citrus season in South Africa has panned out this year and the challenges he's been facing with perishable logistics in South Africa in particular.
I'm Mitchell Brook and I represent the South African Citrus Growers Association. Today's presentation is going to take you through our expected growth in volumes over the next couple of years and how we're going to tackle our logistics in order to ensure that we are able to export the projected volume that we're expecting to come into production in the next few years. Before I move on to that, I want to just explain from the South African perspective. We have three key export corridors that we have in our country, which we like to look at in isolation because we have very different characteristics that we have from a logistics point of view at each of the corridors. So if we consider from the Northern Region's corridor, which is mostly exported from the Durban port, we have fruit which is grown from KwaZulu-Natal through Mpumalanga, Limpopo, as far as Zimbabwe, which most of that fruit is exported out of the Durban port. In the Eastern Cape, from Potensi to Sanders River to the Eastern Cape Midlands, that fruit is exported from the Port Elizabeth and Coega ports. And from the Western Cape, from the Western Cape to Northern Cape, that fruit is exported from Cape Town. We do find from time to time that fruit is moved between the different corridors if we do find logistics complexity, lack of a capacity, or, for instance, fruit that is moved to special types of markets where we only export from certain ports, so that fruit is moved to those ports for the exporting. If we look at the figures that you're seeing in front of you now, the table reflects in terms of our expected growth in volume, which we are expecting to see in the next few years, at least 3 to 5 years, because of these significant plantings that have taken place across Southern Africa. If we consider in totality, in the 2020 year, the export volume was 148.6 million cartons. If we look at going towards the next 3 to 5 years, we have an expectation of 175 million cartons. So from 2019 to 2023-24, we're expecting a 20 to 25% increase in volume. So if we consider from the Northern region, this year 80.3 million cartons were produced and exported. In the next few years, we're expecting 91.8 million cartons. If we look at the Eastern Cape, in 2020, 40.9 million cartons were produced and exported, and we have an expectation of 53 million cartons. In the Western Northern Cape, this year in 2020, 27.4 million cartons were produced and exported, and we're expecting up to 29.6 million cartons to be exported. We are seeing a very big increase in lemon production, and we're also seeing a large increase in soft citrus production, in particular on the late mandarins, varieties like the Durkot and Tango. This is just a bar chart just to show you in terms of the volume growth that we are likely to see. So we're expecting a very big crop to come into production from the northern regions, which is going to put pressure on the Durban port. And we're expecting a significant increase in production from the Eastern Cape, which is going to put pressure on the Port Elizabeth and Coega ports. The Western Cape, we're likely to see strong growth on soft citrus, but we don't believe that we are going to see significant enough volume that's going to put pressure in the Western Cape. I'm going to run through basically a few key industry stats just to show you how we've identified the growth. From the northern region, we are seeing very strong growth in terms of lemons, late navels, and late mandarins, and we're likely to see a lot of pressure on our logistics during the weeks of week 26 to week 34, where we see late mandarins, late navels, as well as Valencia production commencing, which is going to cause a massive peak in production. Just quickly, I'm going to quickly highlight some of the issues, some of the developments that we are pushing through from the association side to ensure that our logistics chain is efficiently managed as we go into this production peak. We are going to see demand on transport supply, so we are expecting to see a lot more growth on our rail transportation. From Limpopo in particular to Durban Port, we have a strategy which is going to be seeing 10,000 containers per year moved by rail. At this point in time, we are seeing 2,500 containers this year, so we're likely to see a lot of more growth that is coming through. In terms of cold store capacity, we are seeing a lot of growth in terms of capacity in the Durban environment. In particular, the pre-cooled cold store facility, which has been developed by Maersk in the Durban port, which is going to see 12,000 pallets capacity increase, as well as the existing facilities in the Durban port have increased capacity at their facilities. We do see some complexity going forward. We have at our terminal, the Durban Container Terminal, we are seeing the berth deepening project on the North Quay, which is our substantial quayside, and we're likely to see some pressure on the berthing of vessels going forward. We do also see maintaining significant volume of specialized reefer shipments, and we're likely to see that to go forward. Specific port projects in the Durban port is the container truck booking system that Transnet are developing. I'm also going to show you a presentation on a barge network that we are hoping to introduce in Durban, as well as short distance rail from the Hammersdale area into the Durban port, as well as the pre-cooled cold store facility, which has a value add for the port. If we look at the rail development, a lot of that development is in the Limpopo area. We are likely to see cold store facilities being built around the Johannesburg area. Already existing facilities are built in Groblersdal, Nelspruit, Hoedspruit, Letsitele, Zanin, as well as Musina. We're likely to see some development on cold store capacity being developed there so that fruit can be transported from Limpopo to the Durban port for export. We are in the process of investigating the viability of introduction of a barge network in the Durban port, and this will link two very important facilities, the Maidawall Fruit Terminal and the Fresh Produce Terminal, with empty containers and full containers being able to circulate around the port without needing to be transported around the port, and they can then take empty containers to be packed at these facilities, and then the barge will take them through to our main deep sea terminals for export. In terms of the Eastern Cape, we are also likely to see strong growth on lemons, also on the late navels and mandarins going into Valencias, so we are expecting to see quite a significant volume growth in the Eastern Cape ports. Again, transport demand is likely to exceed supply. We're also considering a rail development between the Addo-Sanders River area into the Coega and PE ports. Cold store capacity is being developed at a very big rate in the Coega port. Addo cold store and PE cold stores are increasing capacity. The APLR group are currently completing a cold store facility in the Coega port. The Eastern Cape is also able to transport down to Cape Town to export from the Cape Town port if capacity is under pressure or if we do see any congestion and operational constraints in the Eastern Cape area. So a big factor going forward is the container terminals and their ability to handle the fruit exports from those terminals. That area is very prone to wind, and that's something that we are discussing with Transnet on how to create wind-bound strategies. We're also seeing a very big increase in specialized reefer shipments from the PE and Coega ports, and we're likely to see that to go forward as well. In the Western Cape, a very similar picture. We're likely to see very big growth in terms of the soft citrus categories as well as the navels. Late mandarins going into Valencias, so we're likely to see two very significant peaks in the Western Cape. But as mentioned, we don't see very big infrastructure constraints in the Western Cape. The cold store capacity in the Western Cape is quite significant in terms of catering for the deciduous fruit exports, which is a lot bigger than the citrus exports. So we don't see any constraints on cold store capacity. However, our container terminal in the port are very prone to wind delays, and we are also looking at strategies on how to circumvent that. We are also seeing very strong growth in specialized reefer shipments from that port, and we're likely to see that continuing going forward. A very big consideration for us as an industry is the growth in terms of export of reefer containers. In the year 2020, 83,000 containers were exported from our three main ports. In terms of our volume growth, we are expecting at least 107,000 container worth of citrus to be exported within the next 3 to 5 years. So that's going to put a lot of constraint on the supply of empty containers, as well as the increased throughput through our container terminals. So we are going to need to discuss with shipping lines as well as with the key container terminals around how we're going to manage the growth in container shipments from South Africa. In terms of our pre-clearance inspections, markets such as United States, China, Japan, and South Korea are requiring pre-clearance inspection by the Department of Agriculture. We also have the Philippines market, which has been agreed upon for the commencement of the 2021 season. So we're likely to see strong growth in pre-clearance inspection markets as well as cold treatment shipments from South Africa to the Far East specifically. So in 2020, we had 21.6 million cartons inspected by the department and shipped over to these markets. In the next 3 to 5 years, we're expecting at least 33 million cartons to be inspected by the department before exporting to these markets in the Far East. So pre-clearance markets and cold treatment markets are very much aimed towards the Far East, apart from the United States. So we are also looking at programs on how to manage that. If we consider in terms of our high-level strategies, as the CGA, the Citrus Grows, we are looking to increase our information collection and distribution, specifically around production and export volume, as well as collecting port information and vessel statistics to ensure that we are able to see how efficient our vessels are moving from our ports and how productive our ports are working in terms of managing our exports. Our container terminals and our rail infrastructure is managed by Transnet. We have a strong alignment with Transnet to ensure that certain initiatives are being developed to make sure that our export growth is going to be catered for. We have some very interesting information technology systems being developed in collaboration with Transnet as well as the Citrus Grows. We have truck booking systems which are being developed for containers that need to be delivered to the container terminal. We're also in engagement with Transnet around ensuring that equipment and port productivity is in place, that they can meet our expected demand. We're also looking at the optimal reefer plug capacity at the terminals to ensure that's managed in line with our volume growth. We are also looking at, in the Durban port, we have a problem with decongestion, and we have an initiative to look at ways around how to decongest the Durban port. The barge network is something that we are aligning to that program, where we can see assistance to decongest the port. As mentioned, we have a program with Transnet Freight Rail, specifically in Limpopo on the long distance, and Hammersdale, which is 40 kilometers outside of Durban, to increase the rail footprint to the Durban port. We are also engaging with Transnet to have a working structure between our industry and Transnet around making sure that our intended strategies are aligned to our growth, are going to be implemented ahead of our growth forecast. We are also looking at continuing our development of the Maputo port, which is very closely aligned to the exports from the Mpumalanga province, and we are continuing with that program. Also looking with shipping lines, evaluating reefer container supply during peak season. As I've mentioned, we have a very big increase in demand for containers going to come into our industry. And we're also looking at evaluation of reefer capacity on the vessels, and particularly to emerging and growing markets. As I mentioned on the cold treatment shipments, we are doing an evaluation of the resource requirements for the department to ensure that we have enough resources to cater for the extra growth that we're anticipating. We are also evaluating infrastructure and equipment requirements, and we're also going to be looking at projects on how to drive efficiency into cold treatment shipments. Basically, that's a snapshot around our main sort of strategy program on logistics, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to present. My details are at the bottom of the presentation if anyone would like to make contact to find out or have any further information on my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mitchell. Now to Oliver to provide us with a European perspective, how Spanish exporters have been covering this challenging 8 months this year. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and welcome here to Cool Logistics Asia 2020. I hope each of you are healthy and safe, and today you will see me only online, but I hope we will meet soon at any presential congress or meeting again. But let's go to the subject, because I want to show today COVID-19 and Spain's future fruit exports. And for this, we have already seen the effects of the COVID pandemic in the fruit business, and this was a very hard effect for many producers and exporters. And we saw container jam, we saw stopped sea shipping, we saw insufficient hinterland logistics, cancelled flights, all this. But if we just analyze the effects between Spain and China, then we can see the impact of COVID-19 has been noticed in all Spanish exports, and which fell between January and April by 12.4%. If we look to the citrus exports from Spain to China, then we can be afraid, because there we are talking about 90% drop compared with the year before. So citrus season 2019 compared with citrus season 2020 is only a 10% in 2020 from the volume 1919. Why is this happened? Because the entire logistics has collapsed. If we remember, we saw this image. There was flights cancelled from all countries closed border, there was stopped factories, there was stopped the movement, the social movement. We saw accumulated containers in Qingdao, in Shanghai, in Ningbo, in Singapore. We saw accrued ships in the Asian seas, in the American seas, in the European seas. So many effects stopped the whole business or the whole flow of goods in the world. The second reason is because the local market, in my opinion, the European market, have demanded all goods from Spain. And this is meaning the European or the German supermarket, for example, wanted to guarantee the supply in his shops or in his supermarkets. We saw the same effect also in many other European countries like Italy, France, Portugal, or Turkey, for example, to supply the European markets and the European supermarkets. What does this tell us? We could see how fragile the worldwide global fruit trade is and how quickly our logistics reached its limits. And a very important reason for this is our dependency of reefer or with reefer containers from the normal dry containers. So when China's factories stopped, there's not enough traffic to bring back all the reefer containers, and there's not enough volume of goods to make possible that ships are working back to the European or to the American ports. Another reason is the lack of insufficient or the sufficient cooling logistics in many destinations. We have not enough cold store in China where they can unload these reefer containers who accumulated in Qingdao or in Shanghai. Yeah. Spain is now climbing to China to increase its food exports again. China is a very important importer, is a very important market, and Spain want to come back to export to China. But for this, in my opinion, we need to change things in the future. And these things, maybe we will start at the following points. We need smaller and faster ships that we can arrive to different points and to be more flexible. We have to export more knowledge from our agriculture and experience and start local production, for example, producing in China for the Chinese market or producing in China for the Malaysian market. And we need much better logistics for distribution, like cold stores, temperature controlled transport, and many things more. Thank you for listening me. I hope we can discuss this later in the panel.
Thank you, Oliver and Mitchell. That gives us the opportunity now to get into the panel discussion featuring Rahul Bhakde from Zespri, China, and of course, Mitchell, and Oliver. Thank you. Hello. I'm back here again with Andy Cornell in South Africa. Andy Cornell from ABARC Services is the co-moderator for this session, and we're happy to be able to welcome representatives from 3 different continents, starting off with Rahul Bhakde from Zespri, Mitchell Brooks from the Citrus Growers Association in South Africa, and Oliver Huisman from Fruit Consulting in Spain. And of course, Andy, who is also, I think, based in South Africa, unless he's moving, I don't know. But let me just start with a question to all of you. The topic of this session is transport capacity and logistical risk. We have here assembled transport users, and I would like to ask you, first of all, briefly, to comment how COVID-19 has affected you, and how do you think the logistics service community can respond to your demands as customers of the perishable logistics community? So could I ask Rahul to come in first?
Thanks, Alex. I think it certainly did impact us in the beginning of the season, but not with the same extent in all the regions. For example, the lanes which have a bigger trade capacity between New Zealand and China were not as impacted as, for example, when we ship from New Zealand to Southeast Asia or from New Zealand to Africa. They managed to get to some sanity around the end of second quarter, after coming out of that shock. But something that forced them to think long term. So the cancellation of the schedules, the blank sailings, came as a surprise, even for the lines, I think. And again, it goes back, I think it's not necessarily to do with the COVID, but it goes back to fundamental things around their visibility and their reliability, around those lanes. And that remains, in a way, ongoing problem for us, given that there are 100 different solutions on visibility, and having to work with different shipping lines. It's a problem that as an industry we need to address, and that obviously translate into a significant customer dissatisfaction, especially in the markets where we don't have our own presence. So in a summary, I'll let others comment on this, but first quarter was badly hit. Things started improving, after Q2.
Thank you very much for your comments. Let's immediately jump to South Africa now and ask Mitchell if he to respond to that same question.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, and good morning to all our colleagues. Alex, it's a very good question that's being asked there. If we consider our transportation risks, we consider what we term the landside transportation. That would be the landside road and rail trucking to the ports. The second aspect would be obviously the transportation on the sea leg, meaning the vessels, whether it be the underdeck or whether it be containers into markets. So let's just put some context into both of those 2 different modes of transportation. When we initially started with the COVID lockdown in South Africa, it was the end of March. We were very concerned that the COVID was going to impact us in form of logistics as well as in the form of the market demand for fruit. So we kind of didn't really have an understanding of how the season was going to unfold. So the first and foremost issue that we were confronted with was on the sea leg. And that was the form of Transnet port terminals, reducing capacity at all of our terminals from about the 28th of March down to 30%. I immediately knew that that was going to cause massive constraints for our industry, and particularly all industries in South Africa, which are relying on import and exporting of goods. Within the first week, we noticed 20 vessels were at idle outside our ports, and I immediately alerted our industry that that was going to cause a severe backlog in us being able to export to markets if our ships weren't able to call to the ports. We then called out to our minister in charge of our ports. We called out to the Transnet board. We also called out to the Transnet management. And we had a very, very swift impact from government and Transnet level to reopen our ports to a level that we could still able to export and import containers. Unfortunately, at that point in time, the COVID impact had a very detrimental impact in the Cape Town port. And because I think we were all still new at the impact of COVID, particularly the virus itself, a lot of panic was set in the Western Cape, and a lot of staff were not coming to work, and that crippled the terminal quite severely. The other terminals weren't so as affected initially from the COVID. It was really the Western Cape which had a high incidence of COVID in the start of the lockdown. So as we moved in towards June, July, we managed to clear that backlog, and when we got into the peak season, we managed to get back to a level that we could still see our vessels move through the ports in a manner which could then obviously allow the exports to continue. So we were very fortunate to get to a point that we could get our shipping back on track. But now, having said that, the issue around the terminals and obviously with the goods that were not allowed to be imported and exported, the citrus industry and fruit exports was deemed essential goods, so we were able to export without any hindrance. What we were affected by was the lack of goods coming into the country which were not essential. And that impacted our road transportation. So we were able to export and transport citrus to ports unhindered through the COVID process, because our transporters and our exporters were registered as essential goods. However, when the trucks got to the ports, we found that there was no cargo to take back to the reef, which we know we're transporting 1,000 kilometers from our hinterlands down to the ports, and we had a very severe shortage of trucks. So that lasted for a good sort of 3 weeks, and as we got to around June, July, in the peak, our levels of lockdown were reduced down to level 3, and then we were able to get more goods coming into the hinterland. So we were then able to get trucks to the reef to transport back to port. So we were actually very fortunate that in terms of our transport risks, we were very much at the forefront of identifying all the risks that were coming into our country. We had a COVID risk committee, which was formed of our CJ board. And our board chairman, Mr. Cornel van der Merwe, as well as Justin Chadwick, our CEO, were really at the forefront of putting this together. And we were at the top and the front end of all our risks and challenges, and we managed to get through them, having got to the end of the season at 146 million cartons, which is a record season for us. And that, I think, is really down to us being on the forefront of our risks. So we had the challenges, and we were there at the forefront, making sure that we resolve those challenges.
Thank you very much, Mitchell. Let's bring in immediately Oliver Huisman and discuss how the Spanish exporters have been affected by COVID. Is there anything which is fundamentally different from what our friend from China and our friend from South Africa mentioned?
Yeah. We have a very different situation in Spain, because Spain lost 90% of his citrus exports to China, 90%. So this year. But the reason is not only that the logistics not works. The reason is because the European market in the beginning of this pandemic grow with prices where the Spanish producer said, no, we sell in the European market, only in the European market. There's not a high risk in in reefer containers, 40 days traveling to China. There's more price, there's less cost in logistics. And in the other side, we saw, because Spain is a very important exporter of pork meat to China, and we saw that many containers, reefer containers, shipped to China without unloading. So what happens in Europe? In Europe, we have actually a situation. Some companies, industry companies, closed his production. We have less production in industry goods, in machines, in whatever. And with this, we have a problem with the logistics, because Spain, for example, now need trucks to bring his fruit to the German country, to the French, to the Dutch, to the rest of Europe, but there's no logistics from there to here. So now, this what they decided in the beginning of the pandemic is now a big problem, because the cost of logistics is now higher than the cost to bring this to China and back. Because, for example, if we see in summer, we have to pay 1,500, 1,800 euros from Valencia to Köln, to Cologne. Now the prices will be up to 4,000 euros for a truck. So this is a very short thinking what they does here in Spain, and with this they lost 90% of export to China, for example. 4 years, 5 years, 6 years working to open these markets together with logistics, together with marketing companies, together with clients, and now in one or some weeks, just in some weeks, they lost the market. So it's very different to come back now to supply the Asian countries.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Can I bring Andy in now, possibly trying to pull together these three different strands, experiences, and to see how the industry can move forward into 2021. Andy.
Thank you, Alex, and good morning, good day to everybody. Alex, I think what we all experienced around the globe was finding ourselves off our feet. This was brand new territory, and we all became students again in logistics. So what we had to do was find a balance. We had to find a balance between the essentials to keep a shipping string going. The reason the lines pulled strings and there were blank sailings was there wasn't enough cargo to calculate the vessel. It just wasn't worth moving the vessel with just that cargo. So we had to then convince governments that there needed to be a balance. And once we were allowed to also import fertilizers and chemicals, which were essential to production, and also offload from vessels and work cargo that was of a general nature, that enabled the lines to find the critical mass to put vessels back onto strings. And I think this is not a phenomenon, but it was just a global way of adapting and learning to make the logistics supply chains flow once again. And then as the lockdowns were lifted, more and more cargo could then flow in and out, not just the essential cargoes. I think the airlines were a lot harder hit than the shipping lines were, and are still suffering a lot more than what the sea freight has suffered, Alex.
Thank you, Andy. I think Rahul wanted to come in.
I think this is something that we already started doing this year as a part of our rebalancing between the volume that we ship through charters versus the volume that we ship through containers. And that's one way of, in a way, de-risking the reliability. We, in fact, like in China, typically we do on average 6 to 7 charters at the beginning of the season. This year we did almost 11 charters. And something that is on the table for us to explore as a long-term option, especially in the markets where the fortnightly size is good enough, to support the charter booking.
That is very interesting because that also mirrors, I think, the experience in South Africa, where we have seen actually a trend back towards conventional shipping this year. The question is, will that be repeated next year, or will the underlying trend of containerization continue or be slowed down? Mitch, can I get your response to this, please?
Thanks, Alex. Alex, just to respond to your initial question, I think Andy put it into context, but I think just to elaborate more on that, let's talk about what did we learn from this year, asking as we enter into the next season, 2021. As you know, South Africa, our citrus industry is going to grow by 25%. We've already seen that strong growth this year. So our logistics arena is going to be a very, very big and important part of our industry. Talking about what we learned out of this year is when the lockdown happened at the end of March, I think governments were scrambling around in terms of trying to draft different regulations around how to manage this particular thing. And obviously logistics was one area that got very affected initially. In the companies as well, we were panicking, running around, scrambling, trying to protect our employees from the COVID, from the pandemic itself. We then later on, within 2, 3, 4 weeks, we learned that we could actually safeguard our employees at the same time as providing a service to our industries. And that's what the learning curve we got was our employees were not at harm's end or at the front end of COVID when they came back to work. There were measures that were put in place that were able to safeguard employees by when you were doing your sanitization, wearing your mask, sanitizing your work areas, keeping your social distancing. And as we started to learn those habits, we then started to come back to work and get into our environments, not to 100%, but at a formidable level where our logistics systems could continue. If this pandemic is going to come back again, as we hear now, you've just mentioned to us earlier this morning, England is going back into some sort of lockdown measure. A second wave is likely to come. I don't believe we will be as panicked as we were in March. We will go into a hard lockdown. I think we've learned from that. I think we will still be able to continue our logistics environments, our employees going to work, feeling safe and being protected, and not being at harm's way, but still providing the service that we are able to see. And that's the big learning curve that we've had this year, is dealing with the risk and having people not being too adverse to the disease itself, knowing that they can come to work and they're going to feel safe. That was the big step that we managed to get. So I think going into 2021 further on, if we were getting other forms of this type of risk, whether it be a pandemic or whether it be something else similar, I think we were much better prepared than what we were this year. So as Andy said, it was back to school, learning the basics, and we've done that. And I think we're going to be able to get through, hopefully, a better prepared for the future. As you mentioned,
I think I want to bring in Oliver in there and see whether he sees a similarly, basically positive outlook for the Spanish exporters, particularly looking also towards shipping Spanish produce into China, where the situation seems to have been alleviated so that we are not going to have the same problem as we had at the beginning of the pandemic in February, when the containers got stuck and couldn't be emptied, and led to this whole problem of connecting the dry box and the reefer box container shipping schedules, throwing them into disarray.
Yeah, Alex, you know my idea about what have to happen in the future with reefer container. My idea is smaller ships, faster services to different places, and not bringing 20,000 TEU container ships into Valencia port and then stopping in 20 or 25 ports up to Shanghai. So I think this pandemic, we have to learn. This is not the normality. This is not. We have a pandemic. Maybe we have this 2 years more or 1 year more. but this is not a normality. But we have to learn how we can work in situations like a pandemic, and how we can guarantee supply to the different places. And our fruit business is very, very in dependency is this the English word, from the dry docks. So when this pandemic stops all the industry production, Christmas lights or T-shirts, clouds, whatever, we are in the same situation in this moment, but we have crops. So, and this, I think we have to change. We have to change our working for our supply to smaller ships, and bring fresh produce faster and more punctuality to the cities or to the places or destinations where we need this fruit. And then we can work in the next pandemic and in 50 pandemics more, because we are not in dependency of the industry. And this is what we see now. We are dependency of a big ship with 20,000 or 15,000 TEU containers, and we are in dependency of the normal industry and automotive industry. So, and this we have to disconnect in the future to make this more fluid. And we need for this also the hinterland logistics, because in Europe, for example, hinterland logistics collapsed. In China, we have no hinterland logistics because we have hinterland logistics to Shanghai, to Beijing, to Guangzhou, but not to the second or third tier cities. And in South Africa, I don't know the situation, how is the dependency of the hinterland logistics to port. So maybe Mitchell can tell this more.
We've unfortunately run out of time now, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your candid response, your measured response in terms of the hope as well. The supply chain has been actually proved to be incredibly resilient and being allowed to ship produce when it was needed. So I would like to thank you all for your participation in this panel discussion, and I'll have to call it a day now. Thank you very much to all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Alex.
Now on to the final presentation of today. Looking at the port perspective, which is a presentation will be given by Ingrid van Streels, Key Account Manager, Shippers and Freight Forwarders from the Port of Antwerp.
Hello everyone, welcome to this session. I hope everyone is feeling well and being in good health. My name is Ingrid van Streels and I work for the Port of Antwerp. We are very enthusiastic and motivated about our participation to the digital edition of Fruit Logistica in Asia. We also thank Cool Logistics to ask us for a participation to this interesting session. Today, I'm going to speak about transport capacity and logistic risk, and this being told from a port perspective. If you don't know the Port of Antwerp yet, I will give you a very short introduction. So we are the second European port, and we are also ranked number 14 worldwide. We are a truly global port in a centuries-old city in the heart of Europe. Something small and nice, which I like to tell always, is that the first refrigerated vessel ever built was built in the 19th century. To be more exactly, in 1883. This vessel was carrying frozen meat from Argentina to Europe. On its way to Europe, it discharged frozen meat in Antwerp and then next going to United Kingdom. This was for Europe the first start of real cold chain and worldwide reefer trade. During this session, I will give you some insights of Port of Antwerp reefer volumes. I will speak about a more general reefer shipping outlook, some items which we think have a huge impact. I will also explain about logistic capacity for perishables trade in the port and how we plan for the future, and also how we try to be ready for the future and work on a virtual integration of cold chain. So, having a look at Port of Antwerp reefer volumes, when the lockdown started for us in Belgium, the first lockdown started in March. Today we are actually in the second lockdown phase. We really didn't know what the impact would be, but after a while we could conclude that we had a very intense increase of reefer trade. For the operational reefer containers, we can now year to date speak of an increase of 12%. So the growth of operational reefer containers is both in import and export flows. Something even more surprising was that conventional reefer volumes have shown an even higher growth, being an increase of 22%. This is in very high contrast with the evolution of declining conventional reefer volumes in previous year. This is due to the trend of containerization in this segment and also caused by the lack of reefer equipment. So conventional reefer vessels suddenly were used very intensively, much more than was the plan actually. So having a look at a more general reefer shipping outlook, we took out 4 topics which we think have a big impact on cold chain and perishables, and on which we for sure also feel impact at the Port of Antwerp. So the reefer trade in general has performed much better than dry cargo trade during COVID-19. So that's something positive, of course. So the consumer demand for healthy fruit has grown since the beginning of the year, and it still continues to growing. Banana trade volumes has, of course, as a result, also grown. They were already forecast in 2019 to grow for 2020, and now the growth is expected to be higher and will continue to 2021. So many banana exporters, producers are looking for more capacity and logistic capacity in Europe. The seaborne reefer trade forecast to grow at an average annual rate of 3.7% from 2021 to 2024. A big cause of this is that the African swine flu continues to drive demand of proteins into China, into Asia. We have high export volumes going from Europe to Asia because there's a high demand of pork meat. That's something we see here in Europe. And shipping lines told us that they expect to foresee reefer capacity increasing to more than 40% because of this African swine flu. And this is linked to the third topic, which I would like to highlight, and you are certainly familiar with, is that reefer equipment availability is very tight. I remember at Cool Logistics in 2018, we were already speaking about this. Well, the situation didn't become much better actually. Shipping lines have ordered large volumes of new reefer equipment, but the production came also to a halt down because of these lockdowns. And adding to that, we realize that we have a very old fleet of containers and reefers. So a lot of reefers are actually retiring, and we cannot replace them with new reefer equipment. So that's certainly now creating high rates and extra imbalance surcharges from the shipping lines, because they have a big shortage of reefers and also imbalance trades. Fourth topic, there's a lot of debate on this, are the high volumes of COVID-19 vaccines, which we are expecting as soon as the vaccine has been produced. We know that these will probably be moved by air freight initially, but they will take out so much air freight capacity to distribute these vaccines that we foresee that a lot of perishables trade, which is now traditionally transported with air freight, will potentially make a switch to maritime transport modes. Taking in account the reefer shortage, that's something today we cannot foresee what effect it will have, but it will certainly have an effect on the maritime reefer trade. Now, going to logistic capacity and how we plan for the future. This is a picture which is related to it. It's showing a picture of a typical dedicated perishables terminal at the port of Antwerp. You can see that container reefers are being discharged. This is a conventional reefer vessel, so it's a combination of containers being transported, but also fresh produce under deck is being transported. And you also see the cold stores located where the fresh produce will immediately discharge and being prepared to deliver to the market in Europe. Now, why am I showing this? Is that because as a port of Antwerp, we have been thinking of how should we prepare the port infrastructure for the future. So we see these developments in perishables trade, so we have an increase in consumer demand, we have reefer shortage, you have a trend for containerization, which now is becoming suddenly changing slower because these conventional vessels are back in use. So we are defining some opportunities and some challenges. So first one is investments in cold store capacity because of the growing consumption market. That's something we are looking at. I make an important note that this is not because of pandemic lockdown situation. So cold stores are not being built because you want to store more goods. The business model of a cold store is earning, getting income on movement of goods. So a cold store, we are not going to invest in a cold store only just to have more storage capacity. It would be to catch up with the increase of consuming the growing consumption market. So also more logistic activities. We are being challenged, and that's why I showed you the picture of the update of certain terminals. So today terminals are multifunctional and adapting to containerized transports. But still this is a challenge because you need to adapt your space, you need also to reorganize your warehouse. Now there's suddenly a slowdown in this containerization. So that's also a challenge we are following up. And we have a lot of projects in our port, which is an investment in multimodal connection for barge and rail. I speak of reefers transported by barge and rail, so that means that you also need reefer connection and you need to be able to keep this temperature throughout the whole supply chain using these multimodal connections. So those are some challenges and opportunities when speaking of logistic capacity, but at our port, we have also chosen to prepare ourselves. We choose for quality and not specifically for quantity. I would like to explain the GDP project to you. So our mission is to have all the stakeholders in the port community to be GDP compliant. GDP means goods distribution practices to transport pharmaceutical products. That means that we choose for a high qualitative, transparent ocean cold chain. If we are capable to organize this we can for sure also provide a qualitative, transparent ocean cold chain for perishables. So we make the link for pharmaceutical to perishables. What are we doing and how are we preparing ourselves to be the first maritime port to be GDP compliant? We are creating a local GDP community, establishing guidelines and checklists. Participants in this GDP cold chains are the terminals, the maritime shipping line, the logistic players, and transport. Because a lot of companies today are GDP certified, but a lot of procedures are written out for air freight cargo. And today we are making the switch to maritime cargo. And that will result in a high qualitative, transparent ocean cold chain, and perishables will only benefit from this transparent and this qualitative cold chain. And how are we preparing for the future? I will explain you this. Within our Port of Antwerp, we have a specific vision on security. We all know the ISPS, so physically fencing of the entire world or port, already implemented more than 10 years. Today, we are taking a step further and we are creating a digital net in our port. It means that all movements of people and goods must be known. We are putting sensors, smart cameras, and drones, and each person should be able in the port to identify itself. We know who is going where, who can do what. You need to be authorized to work in the port. We are even taking a step further because we are working out a certified pickup system. And this is related to container transport. And that's the reason I'm explaining this. Containers today are many ports released using a PIN code or a kind of release document. And then this driver goes to the terminal and gets the green light for pickup of the container. We are going to switch this process to a 100% digital process and also to an identification-based release. That means that PIN codes won't exist anymore. You will be able to transfer the release right from party to party, and at the end of the chain, the driver will have to identify itself at terminal using its fingerprint. So that's really a huge milestone into this process, and more ports in Europe and outside of Europe are looking into this system to implement this new digital system. And the link with perishables trade is very obvious. We do not often talk about this, but you of course know that a lot of illicit cargo is being transported, and perishables trade is often the favorite kind of cargo chosen by drug smugglers to import this kind of goods into countries. By implementing this system, we are 100% convinced that we have a digital, secured way of picking up containers and knowing who is doing what. Now, that being said, I would like to close my presentation and I give the word back to you, Alex. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ingrid. This brings to the close the first day of Cool Logistics Asia, where we learned a great deal about how the shipping companies and the transport user community have been facing the challenges of COVID-19. On the second day, we will be looking at more in detail fresh food and general food logistics case studies, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.